Today's topic is biomes. So some of you guys did that Google Map biome tour in the computer lab. So you got to see some of these environments that organisms live in. This should be kind of a review. You probably touched on this in elementary school or middle school. But we're going to touch on it here, and there's probably going to be a couple new words that you may not recognize or haven't learned yet. So just as a recap of what we learned yesterday, we talked about trophic levels. How much energy did we say that one trophic level can give to the next trophic level? How much energy is passed from one trophic level to the next? Anyone remember? 10%, right? 10%. So what happens to the other energy, the 90%? How come only 10%? Well, we said that not all of the organisms in one trophic level are eaten. So not all their energy goes to the next trophic level. We also said that some parts of an animal are not necessarily able to be digested and absorbed and used for energy, like the bones and the hooves of organisms. We can't digest those, so we can't get the energy. And the last thing that we talked about is we talked about the fact that organisms use energy in order to live. So some of their energy goes out into the environment or allows them to run or digest food. And that is another reason why some of their energy doesn't get transferred to the next trophic level. So today with biomes, we're talking about these different types of ecosystems. So a biome is pretty much an ecosystem. It is a large region with a specific climate and certain plants and animals. So climate, let's think about what climate means. Climate means weather. So a certain climate, we're talking about temperature, how hot, how cold is it, how much rain does it get, what's the weather like, and then plants and animals. So when scientists look at where one biome starts and one ends, for example, where does the desert end and where does this grassland start? They're looking at the difference between climates. We know a desert is probably drier than a grassland. And then the plants and animals. There's probably going to be different plants and animals in a desert than there is in a grassland. So what determines what biome is located in what area of the world? How do we figure out which biome is going to be located where? The two key factors, this is super important. It will be on your test, I can guarantee you. Two key factors that determine biomes, which biome is where, are temperature and precipitation. So let's just look at temperature for a second. How is a rainforest different from the Arctic or the tundra? Well, they're different temperatures, right? A cactus isn't going to live in the Arctic or at the North Pole. Why? It can't live there. And then precipitation. All right, if we take the desert and the rainforest, they're going to have similar temperatures. Desert will probably be a little warmer, but the desert doesn't get hardly any rain, and a rainforest gets tons of rain. So the two key factors that determines what ecosystem or biome is where are temperature and precipitation. So let's talk about each individual biome. We're going to start off with the tundra. So the tundra has very few plants. Some people think it doesn't have any, but it does. If you can see in this picture, there's some green here. Plants are found typically more towards the coast. So if you think like Antarctica or the Arctic, typically we have plants found closer to the coast rather than like North Pole, South Pole, because it's a lot colder at the North Pole and South Pole. So these are frozen most of the year, very cold, and they're the northernmost biome. So if we remember our compass directions, right, north is at the top, meaning this is the furthest to the top of the globe. Okay, so this is where we get the Arctic, some parts of Greenland and Iceland, some parts of Alaska, maybe even Canada. These would be considered tundra. All right. So below the tundra, where it's still cold, we get something called taiga. Now, this is not the rapper, it's spelled differently, all right? But taiga is a coniferous forest or a pine forest. Now, why do we call it coniferous? Well, a conifer is a pine tree, okay? Now, why is a conifer a pine tree? Well, pine trees produce cones. Notice in the beginning of this word, C-O-N, cone, right? So another word for pine trees is conifers. So a coniferous forest or pine tree forests grow up north. Now, if you've ever been up in northern Wisconsin, you might see some or a lot of pine trees, all right? So some of the taiga from Canada trickles down into northern Wisconsin. So we see a lot more of these pine trees in northern Wisconsin. The taiga is typically found in Russia, Canada. Again, it's not the Arctic, it's not tundra, it's just below that, so it's still really cold. So the other type of forest, we actually have three types of forest, but another type of forest we have here is deciduous. And we said there are coniferous trees. There are two different types of trees found in the world, coniferous and deciduous. Coniferous are pine trees, like we just said. Deciduous are leafy trees. They're like the regular trees that you guys draw like this, right? Wow, that's a really awful drawing. But they're the typical trees that you guys see around here, the oak trees and maple trees. They're leafy trees. And these leafy trees lose their leaves in the fall, so they change color, lose their leaves. Pine trees don't lose their needles, all right, unless they're dying. So a deciduous forest is what we have mostly here in Wisconsin. That's the biome that's probably the most present in Wisconsin. Next up, our last type of forest. So we have three types of forest, coniferous, deciduous, and then we have tropical rainforest. All right. So again, this is a leafy forest. We don't have pine trees or conifers in a tropical rainforest. It's a leafy forest. It gets lots and lots of rain, okay? And then lots of vegetation. What's vegetation? Anyone know? Vegetation is just plants. So if you look at this picture here, it's all green. There are so many plants. And one of my favorite things is when you go into a rainforest, I've been to a couple different ones, you look around and literally everything is green. Think about if you go into a forest here. You see some brown, right? You can probably see the sky. You see tree trunks and some of the dirt. You don't see that in a tropical rainforest. Everything is covered. The tree trunks have moss and vines. Literally everything looks green. Rainforests are found near the equator, okay? So the equator, what's the equator? It's that middle line that goes through the globe, right? So it's really warm. And like I said, it gets lots of rain. When I was in Ecuador for a month, it rained every single night. Okay? That's a lot more rain than we get here. So tropical rainforest, exactly like it says, it's a forest, it gets lots of rain, it's warm, and it has leafy trees. Now, next up we have grassland. This is what Wisconsin used to have a lot of. It used to have a lot of prairies and grasslands. But what happened is over time, the settlers came in and they burned these forests, or sorry, these prairies. Okay, here's my awesome fire. Burn the prairies, and they use this land for farming. Why did they want to use this land? Well, the soil right below that these prairies is super, super healthy and super rich and full of nutrients. So a lot of these prairies were burned down and converted to farm fields. The other prairies, what happened to some of them grew a lot of trees and became forests. So what happens is if you don't have a lot of fires going on in these prairies, is trees start to take over. Now, fires are natural part of grasslands. We get lightning strikes. Here's my awesome lightning strike. And a lot of times this starts fires. That's normal. That's actually good for the prairie. And these prairies burn, and what happens is when they burn, they get rid of the trees. The prairie grasses still come up because they have really, really long roots, and they can just pop right up again. But the trees are killed because their roots are not very long. So there are a lot of just natural fires that occur because of lightning strikes. But over time, if these don't happen, we get a lot of trees, and then this turns into a forest. So now in Wisconsin, we have a lot of forests, and then we have a lot of farmlands. All right, we're skipping that one. Here's the last one, the desert. You guys should know this. Hot, dry, little rain, few plants and animals. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't any plants and animals. Of course, there are plants and animals. You guys can see some little grasses, some shrubs. You guys know cacti grow in the desert. Um, Typically, these are kind of found around the equator too, but they're areas that don't get a lot of rain. So it's still really hot because it's next to the equator, but it doesn't get a lot of rain. So these are the biomes. So you guys will need to be able to, or need to be able to match these up, the descriptions, with the biome for a test. Okay, eventually, whenever we have that test, if I give you this definition, right? Which biome is hot and dry, has little rain, few plants and animals? Can you pick out that it's the desert if I give you multiple choice or matching? That's what you're going to need to do. And I also might have you identify pictures. Okay? So if I give you this picture, can you tell me, oh, this is a desert? It's not a rainforest. It's not a pine forest, a taiga. It's not a deciduous forest. It's a desert. So those are the types of things you're going to need to know for the test. All right.